It's about 8:17. It's so I'd like to call the Whatcom PUD regular meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the first thing is to approve the agenda. You all might notice that it's a slightly shorter agenda. But we wanted to make sure we left plenty of room for Bob Schutz, the CEO of Energy Northwest's presentation, as well as executive session. So is there any changes to the agenda?
I do have one small request. I've got something I want to share with the three commissioners in open agenda, but it should take no more than 1 to 2 minutes.
So let's see.
And it'd be under new business.
So yeah, well, let's just do it under new business, but that's okay. So we'll add a B, which is a mini general manager's report. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just a single issue that I
Great,
need to share.
Great. All right. Well, I don't know if we need to approve or change the agenda.
I would add, it's not on the agenda, so I would, before commissioners' reports, maybe.
Sure, I'll entertain a motion to amend the agenda to create, allow our GM to provide a quick report under new business.
I move we approve the amended agenda to allow for a report from the general manager.
Okay, I'll second. There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, let's move on to the claims for August 22nd. Any discussion on the claims?
I'll make a motion to approve the claims.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Commissioner Grant,
Aye.
thank you.
The next item on our agenda is public comment. And I think we have someone in the room.
No comment.
Oh, come on, you have a huge advantage now. Rick is not in the room. You can speak without any counterpoint. All right, well, thank you, Robin. Anybody online who'd like to make a comment? Oh, Rick is on. Please, Rick, go ahead.
I just want to let you know that I'm online so I can comment.
Morning, Rick.
Good morning.
All right, if there's no further comment, let's proceed. I'll close the public comment and let's move on to Bob Schutz's presentation.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. Every couple of years we try and visit all of our members to discuss what it is that Energy Northwest is doing. And so that's where I'm at today. And I think Annette Ann has a presentation, and here it goes. Ann, I'm sorry. And I'm going to verbally cue the slides here, so apologize for that. But the next slide. And believe me, it's nice being over here in Whatcom County today. That the view of Tri-Cities, it's not what it looks like today. We're buried in smoke. I don't think I can see my neighbor's house when I left yesterday. So, so thanks for your nice clean air over here.
Just we ordered it for you, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Because yesterday at this time it was pretty smoky.
Oh, really?
So Chris put in an order for clean air.
All right. Well, you guys do good. So hopefully your customers appreciate it. All right. So Energy Northwest, next slide, Ann. You were there. Here we go. So, first and foremost, we're 100% carbon-free electricity generator, and we own a little bit of everything. So we own and operate hydroelectric facilities. Our biggest facility is Packwood, which is just south of Mount Rainier. Wind, we have the Nine Canyon Wind Project, about 100 megawatts. We do have, I'll say, 3 solar projects, a small one, White Bluff, a larger one, about 4 megawatts, called the Horn Rapids facility, which includes a 4 megawatt hour battery. And then probably what we're most known for, Columbia Generating Station, our largest asset, 1,200 megawatt General Electric boiling water reactor, located on leased land on the Hanford Reservation. So we are not Hanford, we're not part of Hanford, but we do sit on the DOE land out there. Next slide. Okay, we are also public power. So Energy Northwest is a municipal corporation of the state of Washington. And we were formed in 1957 to serve all municipal and public utilities in the state of Washington. We currently have 28 members, Whatcom being one of them. And again, we can really do whatever it is our members ask us. Tends to be focused on electricity generation, but you needed us to pick up your garbage. We could arrange to make that happen. I'm not sure it would be attractively priced, but we can do anything. Each of the members gets a vote on our board of directors. We have one utility, Snohomish, that takes such a large percentage of our power from Columbia. They actually get 2 votes. But in general, it's 1 vote per member. And the primary responsibility of the board of directors is to appoint 5 of their own to our executive board. So we have an executive board that does most of the work, has 5 inside directors, 3 outside directors, and then 3 are appointed by the governor. And so they do most of the work. They meet probably, as you do, about monthly. You're probably bi-weekly here, I guess.
Twice a month.
Yeah, bi-week, yeah. And so there we are. Next slide. This is the executive team. So on the bottom row, Greg Cullen, the Vice President of Energy Services and Development. I actually call him the VP of everything else. Grover Heddle to his left is responsible for nuclear operations, but Greg does all the other outward facing work, all our non-nuclear generation. And his group actually right now is running our new nuclear project. Eventually it'll move over to Grover. Next slide. Okay, our services. You were there? There we go. So, what do we offer our members? So on that first bubble there, aggregation and generation, really over the years, we are most effective when we do something for groups or our entire membership class at once. We don't have to do it that way. There are some things we do for individual members, but in general, the more we can do for a larger group, the more effective we are. So all of our generating assets have multiple participants. In case of Columbia Generating Station, there's actually 92 owners of Columbia. And so, again, that's where we spend most of our time. We do look in other places for collaboration. So we have found, over the last decade that where we can gather 1 or 2 or more of the utilities together for specific projects, that we're more likely to get grant assistance, either federal or state, to make it happen. So, for example, right now we have a program we call our federal funds program, where we go out and we look at all the federal legislation to see what grant opportunities there are. If our members are interested in them, we will go ahead and actually make the application for them.
So Bob, just to share with you, we
yeah.
actually signed on to that program 6-8 weeks ago.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're a member on that and trying to take full advantage of it. So thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, so that's only not even a year old, that program. I think we've already received over $30 million in grant assistance for both ourselves and our members. So, hopefully will be as productive for you. Another area we've worked on in that collaboration is on workforce development. We established, 3 or 4 years ago, an intern program where we go out and we find and interview and offer interns to our members, and we'll search statewide for them. And, you know, our mission in that is to introduce people to public power, because most people don't understand public power, you know, the service to your customer, you know, how that's at the top of the list. So that was how the program started out. And our first year, we only had 4 interns, but we gather all the interns every summer, and we'll bring them down to the Tri-Cities or somewhere else, and we'll take them out to a dam, one of the big dams, and show them how that works. Or we'll take them to a gas peaking unit, or we'll take them to our solar farm or our wind farm. And so they get to see everything, you know, on the technology side on what the public power can do for their members. And then they'll go back to their parent utilities and make a report, like a, you know, education report out to the general manager. So first year 4, I think last year 27. So it's been expanding year after year after year. On the cost effective side, we mostly for things that we've had to do for Columbia and been able to remarket, we can provide other services to our members. So for example, we have 2, I'll say, world-class laboratories, an environmental services lab and a calibration lab. So again, we built those initially for Columbia. We had some extra capacity and we expanded for outside customers, and now we're actually adding manpower. So federal work on the Hanford site, we're doing all of their calibration now, for example. So wherever we can find some other cost-effective operation, we'll do that. Electric vehicle charging stations. So we've been into that for about 5 years now. We're just finishing a state funded project to add 12 electric vehicle charging stations over White Pass. And I think we have 2 more to finish up and we'll be done. We're bidding right now on the 101 loop around the Olympic Peninsula, and then another tail that goes from near the Tri-Cities out to the Pullman area. And so lots of opportunities there, lots of federal and state money. In all cases, as we do those, we are partnered with the local member utility because we need to hook up to something. So it's been pretty good. We're a little bit, you know, the state is not the fastest moving organization in the world, as you might know. So, you know, the Route 12 charging station, I think we got that bid 3 years ago. And, you know, finally, by the time the contracts are let and the money flows, it's 2 years later. And, you know, it's been an interesting inflation time. So, you know, when your bid is 2 years old, it's much more expensive to install them. But those have been pretty successful. We have done some work on demand side management, both residential and utility scale, mostly with the local Tri-Cities utilities. None of them have really adopted it yet. Richland is just in the process of converting, you know, smart metering AMI. I would say they kind of maybe, I'm a customer of Richland Utilities, and I'll say they fumbled their smart meter conversion. The smart metering worked well, but the business connection, you know, to the billing system was not perfect. And so there was quite a lot of angst on that. So fortunately not our project, but, you know, we're looking at the ability for the utilities to go in and adjust thermostats and hot water heaters. It's not new technology. About what we've got out of that now is I'll say a cost model. So if you were thinking of doing that here in Whatcom for some reason, we could give you the cost model to maybe help you work through your business case to get it done. We do offer other professional services, again, mostly outcomes for things that we're doing for ourselves. So at Columbia, we're required to have a cybersecurity program. You know, the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who's our regulator, mandates that we have one, and they come in about every year and inspect our program. We've done very well for that, and so we started marketing that capability. And I'll say it's a broad spectrum of services. For a lot of our members, we have just done penetration tests. You know, we try to break into your system, and we just give you a report, and you do what you want with it. On the other end, for Port of Kennewick, we have completely taken over their IT operations. So we run their servers, their software, their desktop computers, whatever it takes. So again, if you're looking for some help in that area, that is something that we have done. Legislative services. So John, we have, a fairly large 4 lawyers on board. Sometimes they have extra capacity, and we have done some legal work, mostly in contract reviews for some of our members, and same with legislative affairs. So we have lobbyists in Olympia and DC. If you've got some particular question or a piece of legislation you don't want to comment on, we can facilitate that for you as well. So just let us know. And then opportunities, let's see, next slide. So I'll say these are our current ongoing projects. Federal funding program we have already talked about. Ruby Flats is initially 150 megawatt solar project on the south. It's North Richland, south end of the Hanford Reservation. Ultimately, we'll expand it to 350 megawatts. This one's moving slower than we would like, mostly trying to just get the interconnection agreement through BPA. But we've got a contractor who did our Horn Rapids facility, and we're ready to push ahead on that. Grid modernization, I already mentioned that, both residential and utility scale demand response and demand voltage reduction. On the workforce development side, the key piece there is the intern program that I mentioned. We do have other workforce development going on. We sponsor a program at Columbia Basin College for various, I'll say, trades in the nuclear operations, and they get a 2-year certificate, associate's degree. We actually graduate more from that program than we can use, and so they don't all. We bring them out during our refueling outages for to expose them to the plant with some hands-on work, but we typically have not had enough positions to hire them all. So, but the good news is they go out to other plants, and it's been pretty successful. Electrification, I already mentioned, mostly around electric vehicle charging stations. Right now, we have focused just on the transit chargers, the level 2, level 3 high voltage chargers. We're starting to see interest in small level 1 chargers like at hotels. So we're staying out at the, I'm not going to say it right, some Yahoo, close. Okay, thank you. Resort, they have 1 Tesla charging station, and there's like 30 in the parking lot. So hotels are looking about just putting those in. If anyone owns an electric vehicle, those are they really don't charge your batteries significantly unless you're plugged in all night long. So, but still, people are asking for it. And then generation, storage, and transmission. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's our bread and butter. For the most part, that's what our members have asked us to do, and I'll talk some more. Next slide. Yeah,
is SMR under the category of generation?
Yes.
Okay. So in the slide, a couple slides ago, you talked about the areas of function of Energy Northwest. And is it fair to say that the majority of interest from your members is in the opportunities involvement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what we have learned, in this post-COVID time, there is tons of money out there for support of clean energy, transmission, storage, and in a couple of places, we or our members have applied for grants and not gotten them, and they've not gotten them because the service area was too small. We have found that we're much more successful. Take the EV charging stations. We bid to do the 101 loop, and we're not awarded the bid because it was Energy Northwest. We've rebid it as Pacific County, Clallam County, Douglas County, and the state says, hey, that should carry the day. So, in some cases, pretty small projects that are relevant locally, where we can connect those with some of our other members, it just gives us a higher probability of getting the grant through. Even if EN didn't necessarily do any of the work, You know, we just got everyone together to make a joint application. So that's part of the federal funding. You have a need, there's a, you know, a grant that's available that has a specific purpose here at Whatcom County. And but if you were to bid for it on your own, you know, it might not be accepted. But if we could connect you with, you know, Clark County, who's trying to do the same thing at more or less the same time, you're more successful. So,
Yeah, I mean, you know, given where we are and as in general, the public power community is hungry for more power. VP is clearly communicated that it doesn't want to expand the milk it provides all of us eating all of us puppies in the public power community. So we but I'm sure that's got to be the big focus is getting Energy Northwest help in expanding the public power supply.
so, you know, yes, it's an interesting, you know, if you've been to the PPC meetings, working through the provider of choice contracts, you know, I would say at a high level, you could take all the utilities, all Bonneville customers, and they're kind of in three groups. So they're the big guys like Seattle City, Tacoma, Snohomish, you know, they're just going to figure it out on their own, and they have the resources to pull it off. And then there are small PUDs. I'll include Whatcom in that, but you know, Basin 1 and 3, you know, they're all pretty tiny, and their interest is in, as I watch it, it's typically been, I just want my tier 1 power. I want it to cost as low. I want that cost to be as low as possible. And then you have, I'll say, the utilities in the middle, which are the fast growing utilities. So the utilities in the Tri-Cities area, for example, Clark is another one, you know, that they are probably already above their high water mark. You know, they got no headroom, and they say, well, you know, I'd rather make tier 1 as big as possible, but if you can't, a BPA, let's talk about tier 2 and what that should look like. You know, we need it to be carbon free in Washington, you know, and we need it to be, you know, some type of price guarantee and what it's going to cost. So those three groups of utilities, which is the same three groups among our members, all have different needs and wants. And so it's been really
and depending on how you look, which perspective you look at with Whatcom PUD, we could be in one of those three groups, or we could be in a whole another group of our own, which is with maybe a few others, which is because we're looking at a discontinuous growth, obviously, with the idea of municipalization. It's not an organic growth, it's a step change as an organization.
Yeah, and the other thing is, discounting that completely for the moment. We are a utility that is over our high water mark. So even though we're relatively small, we are in that bucket that really wants Bonneville to provide tier 2 at a cost-effective rate. And we've asked them for that as part of the, you know, the regional dialogue. So it's one of those weird things where, yeah, we're small, 25 average megawatts, but we're just slightly over our high water mark.
Yeah.
And that triggers all the tier 2 conversations.
right. We have found, I'm sure you're aware of it, but you know, there's 5 utilities who were slice block customers and who are becoming full requirements customers before the end of the existing contract, right? They're switching over, I think, October this year. And why are they doing that? Because of the volatility in the tier 2 market. They don't want to mess with it. They want Bonneville to provide that service. So we think we have some options, and I'll talk about that here as we go through. So, hey, so those are all the things
Thank you for that side discussion.
So the first group of slides was kind of about the things we're doing. You know, the next few slides talk about, well, why would you come to Energy Northwest for any of that beyond being a member? And you know what, I'll just point to Columbia Generating Station. We think it's operating pretty great right now. You know, over the last decade, we have reduced our production cost of power almost in half, and we finished last year at about $3.11 a kilowatt hour. I'm sorry, megawatt hour. And you know, that compares pretty favorably with the renewables. So you know, wind, actually in our portfolio, our wind power is our most expensive, followed by our hydro, followed by our best performer is nuclear, and solar really is price is so high that it's hard, especially when you put it with battery. So, our wind is 4 cents or more, which is pretty typical. I didn't look at natural gas last week, but it's right about the same price. Solar with subsidies is about the same price. But it's intermittent, so you got to pay to firm it up. So we think our current nuclear portfolio is comparable in terms of production costs.
Just a point of clarification on the wind.
Yeah.
That's 4 cents shaped, or is it 4 cents?
No one shape.
So it's not an apples to apples comparison.
It's not.
And it's also at the bus bar shape,
Yes.
so that doesn't include transport as well.
Right, if you were to put a price tag on the wind shaped, would you have any idea what that would be?
Well, I don't know on the wind. So our cost, the wind Pine Canyon is about between $90 and $100 is the cost delivered to our members.
Okay.
And solar, the shaping charge on our solar farm is about 100%, so it doubles the price to shape it.
And so
Or
for people
permanent.
that have no experience in what you're talking about, shaped means.
Oh, so but so
Sorry.
I'll take a sidebar here. So we have it'll illustrate my point. So our Horn Rapids solar facility, which was really built to demonstrate having a solar and a battery together, and it's not very big. It's 4 megawatts, and the battery is 4 megawatt hours of battery storage. And so they're hooked together, and most people think that we use the solar all day long to charge up that battery and then discharge the battery at night when the sun goes down, which is absolutely not the way we operate it. Okay, we actually charge it from the grid at night and discharge it during the day. And if you look at what the load demand is, and I'm not sure in Whatcom County, but typically there's a little peak demand in the morning as people turn their toasters on. Right, that comes down during the day, and then there's a big peak at night, between about 4 and 9, as everybody comes home and they plug in their electric vehicle and they turn on the microwave and they're doing their laundry. So shaping is trying to get your supply to be the same shape as the load.
Gotcha.
Think of it that
Okay,
way.
great.
So in the case of our solar and battery, we'll charge that battery at night off the grid when there's plenty of power available, and we'll actually discharge it during that peak in the evening.
And so Jamie, just further, if you look at markets where they have very deep renewable penetration like California,
Mhm.
they end up with an even more peculiar model. I mean, Bob can articulate exactly what he's doing, and everybody goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. In California, the problem is they have such high levels of solar penetration that they overgenerate as soon as everybody leaves to go to work. And so they have to suddenly break off a bunch of generation. So they need generation you can ramp down immediately. And then the load kind of stays flat all day long. And then when the sun sets is when the load actually comes up. So they have, and it's like 9,000 megawatts per hour that they have to ramp units for 3 or 4 hours in the evening. And so they're looking at batteries to fulfill that one little ramping function. Otherwise, they have to have fast start gas-fired generators.
Nice.
So depending on where you are in the grid and how much renewable penetration you've got and how much hydro you've got and what your wind resource is, all of that depends on the shape that you have to generate to match your load. And it's just hellishly complicated.
We're very lucky in the Pacific Northwest because the hydro system is very responsive. I'll say another thing people don't understand is on the hydro, while it can rapidly change power. I just had an argument with someone last week. Well, let's build another 1,000 megawatts of wind. And when the wind's blowing, then you just stop the hydro and you save all that water. The problem is in the whole Columbia River system, it's essentially run of the river where Grand Coulee can store. But if the dam is not generating, it's dumping the water because we got to keep the river moving for fish.
Mhm.
So it is very responsive. It helps with what Chris was describing, but you're not saving anything when you do that. Just also on Columbia, we've been able over the last decade to add about 50 megawatts to our output with some minor modifications. And I'll say just making sure the equipment's running really well. Columbia's now tapped out on the coldest day of the year. We're limited by our generator capacity. So in the summer, we got room, but because Columbia's very sensitive to the environment. If the wind is blowing or it's really hot out, we're not as thermally efficient. Heat rate goes up. Okay, next slide. Our current performance. So there's an industry organization, essentially all the nuclear utilities get together, and they've got a group that comes out and does an inspection of every plant every 2 years. And you get a grade for that. And in Columbia's history, we've gotten the top grade 3 times in 40 years, and including the last 2 inspections in a row. So 2 in a row, and we're shooting for 3. Next inspection is in 2024. And so we think we're running really well right now. So I do thank our members and our utilities and the participants, because part of that good performance is making sure we invest in the plant to make sure it runs well. Next slide. And last year we had our best year ever. We actually generated 9.8 gigawatts over there. We could have generated the 10,000, but sometimes in the spring, we actually get dispatched when there's too much water in the river, and rather than throw it away. So as it turns out, typical dam, the turbine discharges underwater, and non-productive spill comes over the top. The water coming over the top drags a bunch of air into the water, which makes the fish sad, and we don't want to have sad fish. So better to generate. Next slide. All right, this one's no surprise to you. This is, the Climate Commitment Act and Clean Energy Transformation Act. It essentially requires eventually all electric utilities to be 100% carbon free, and it does it in a couple of steps. So the next step is just 2 years away, when all of our coal-fired generation, including coal imports, are supposed to be eliminated. So TransAlta site at Centralia, they've got 1 unit left, about 750 megawatts that'll come offline, scheduled to come offline. Not quite sure how we deal with the import piece, because Bonneville, they don't have a carbon-free product. They're nearly 100% carbon-free, but they're not completely. So the next milestone after that is 2030, where we all have to be greenhouse gas neutral. So that's 80% actually carbon free. And then that last 20%, you can have essentially renewable energy credits for. You may be aware the auctions for those credits just started this year. And in the first 2 auctions raised nearly $1 billion. So again, another argument I had maybe a little longer ago, a month or so ago, they're at this conference I was at, people were dancing in the street about, oh, we got this $1 billion to reinvest into clean energy transformation. And I just asked, well, where did the $1 billion come from? Says, well, all these people bought these credits. I said, yeah, and who are those people? Well, they're gasoline providers and electricity providers. And where do they get that money? But they just have that money. So no, it comes from your ratepayer, is who's paying it. And so I think they're going to do at least 2 and maybe 3 more auctions this year. So the good news is it's money that could be reinvested. If it is reinvested in clean energy products, hopefully. And then by 2045, of course, we have to actually be 100% carbon free. So how can Energy Northwest help? Next slide. Well, a couple things to look at, projected load growth. This is actually the actual graph out of the 2021 power plan by the Power and Conservation Council. And somewhat simply, it says, well, load might stay the same, and it might go up a little, and it might go up a lot. They didn't really quantify what it might be. PNUC just released their report.
Please find it.
Pacific Northwest Utility Coordinating Committee.
Okay.
So PNUC is a group that I'll say represents all utilities, investor owned and public power in the Pacific Northwest region. And they did a very simple analysis. They just gathered everyone's IRP and saw what the projected need was, and it came out with about 6,000 megawatts of additional capacity required over and above what the system is currently providing. So, that's probably the best projection. The other one is Association of Washington Business, AWB. They project that between now and the end of this decade, Washington State will add an additional 1 million residents, 1 million residents. So, if you just look at that load without even worrying about electrification, everybody's car coming home, the last session, they tried to pass a bill that would really, at the end of the day, only applied to Puget Sound Energy, but said no more residential gas hookups for anything, not for heating, not for cooking, not for anything. And so driving all of that into electric as well. That is not captured in any of this, right? Next slide.
What was the precipitous drop in 98, 99 of demand?
Oh, that was a result of the West Coast energy crisis.
The Enron, yeah.
Yeah, and that was real. That was largely driven by conservation measures that were taken in California that were meant to be temporary, but customers liked the lower bills and they kept them.
Yep.
And I don't think that Cal ISO even today is up to the peaks that they had back then, or just.
No, my wife and I have a house in San Diego. One of our daughters lives there, and every day last week they took control, SDG&E took control of our thermostat, and dialed it up and dialed our hot water heater down. So, so conservation is key. And if you look at the Northwest Power Act, which is the legislation that enables Bonneville, it says that they're short in priority order. They're supposed to, 1, go to conservation, 2, go to market purchases, and then it's not till number 3 that they can create new generation. So that's been a problem for us to try and expand. Next slide. And Chris, I'm going to move along, but I'm going to probably exceed my hour at this pace, be very close. So I'm not keeping track of me. I know you got to stay on your agenda. So
Well, no, we've intentionally,
okay.
planned for the conversations.
All right. No, I appreciate it. So we did a study a couple of years ago using a firm called E3, who's done a lot of work in the environmental and energy, I'll say grid resiliency area. And we looked at, what would it take in the Pacific Northwest to actually achieve 100% reduction or see 100% greenhouse gas free, carbon free. And then that first peak over there, what would it take to do it with just renewable sources, so wind and solar plus storage? And you would have to add about 110 gigawatts of additional power, because 1 gigawatt of wind doesn't necessarily, because it doesn't cover 24 hours a day. You have to overbuild. So that's the reflection there. The next bar is we add in Columbia Generating Station, and what we specifically add in is our license is going to expire in 2043, which is right before the 2045 goal. So the second bar assumes that you extend Columbia's license an additional 20 years, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So that buys you about 20 gigawatts of less overbuild. And then the last 2 blocks are finding some other firm resource. So it could be new nuclear. That's what they did use in this, but it could be, right now, I think biomethane is considered carbon free. So you would get credit for that. You could build a lot of that, or a lot more storage.
Or geothermal.
Or geothermal. Yep. And so if you could plug those in, you could see that you significantly reduce the overbuild you would require in solar and wind. So, you still need to add capacity. And, in the worst case of those 2 blocks, almost 40 gigawatts, but that saves almost 80 gigawatts of overbuild. Next slide.
I remember seeing this to work when I was on the board of Energy Northwest. But I don't remember that slide. I really like that slide.
Okay. If you're, somehow this didn't turn out great. Apologize for this slide. This is the same data shown in a different way. It's on the y-axis, and I apologize. I think I can make my point with what we can see. But on the y-axis of this one, so the left side, is the incremental cost of these 4 scenarios. And across the bottom is percent of gas house reduction. So kind of on all the way to the left, we start at about 80%, which is where we are today. Okay, we're in at least in the Bonneville service area, we're about 82-83% carbon free. And so to go to that, it doesn't take much energy. The blue line is if you tried to do it with renewables alone, so that on the stack chart, the column chart, the one to the left, the purple one says it's Columbia. And you see that both of those stop at about 95%, which means we simply can't get to 100% greenhouse gas free if all we do is build renewables. It's impossible at any price. Okay. And then it's even a struggle with SMRs and biomethane, which is the orange looking one, or SMRs, and new scale design was used for this. But the other interesting part of this graph is you can see it kind of goes slowly up and then it rapidly goes up. That point is around 92%. And so, another takeaway is if you were to change your goal from 100% carbon free to 92% carbon free, you could do it with renewables for fairly low cost. Okay. And so I'm not a policy guy, but if I was to sit back and read this, I would say, 1, don't throw away your gas peakers. Because what gets you that last 8% of power, and it's only on the coldest days or the hottest days of the year, or for an hour around the peak, you might need to run some natural gas. So if you own natural gas, you may be forced to lay it up, but I wouldn't throw it away.
So in your opinion, and I asked in your opinion for a reason, what's the best way to have that conversation around 92%? Is that something you want to push back to the public power community that you represent, or is Energy Northwest participating in that conversation? Are you just wanting to be the messenger, or are you wanting to be?
Yeah, I think there's zero hope of changing the current state policy off 100% carbon free. I think what will happen though is when we get to 2030 and 2045, we're going to find that we miss the targets. And so what will we use to back up the miss, and it probably would be natural gas. So this is my opinion. I would tell our members, for those few that own gas units, be careful about decommissioning them in a way that makes them unusable in the future. I know there's reasons to do it because it counts against your net requirements, but.
So Bob, in some of the organized markets in the Midwest and PJM, for instance, what they're finding.
PJM.
Huh?
PJM.
Yeah,
The market in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Midwest.
Bunch of states get together and they have a coordinated.
I forget what it stands for. MISO is the Midwest Independent System Operator. Midwest, that's MISO. The PJM is a regional transmission organization, RTO, that's north and east of MISO. But what they found in ERCOT, which is Texas's ISO, and in MISO and PJM, is that they've all recognized that to meet the current goals, even though Texas has the largest wind fleet in the nation by far, much larger than California's, they have to have gas available for peakers. And the problem has become that the people who own the gas plants can't recover enough investment to keep them open. And that's why they didn't do all the cold weather weatherization in Texas a few years back. And, so it's one of these, darned if you do and darned if you don't. You've got to perhaps preserve some gas, but then you've also got to pay the owners enough to keep it in running shape. And that's a challenge.
Yeah. So just to close up on your comment, Energy Northwest is not working with the legislature to change the current clean energy transformation goals are, we see it as our mission is to help our utilities meet them. But, you know, this is almost describing what the fallback would be, or what it could be if we didn't get there. Or to simply make the point that if you really are committed to 100% carbon free, you can wallpaper the 585 square miles of Hanford with solar panels and it won't get you there. So, next slide. So this was article from just a few months ago in June. And Sweden is very, very similar to the Pacific Northwest. They have a huge amount of hydro. They have a huge amount of wind. They have about 25% nuclear, no solar. And they had an absolute commitment to being greenhouse gas free. And they were relying on wind mostly to carry the day. And so the actual headline is not exactly correct. What they dumped is they've given up on renewables and are going to expand their nuclear portfolio because what they have found is their wind exposure, it's so intermittent that they're worried about their grid reliability. The graph on the right side is coming out of clearing up. I don't know if you all get that. So, okay, so you know they have a BPA load graph in every week, and I put this together in May, and the blue line is wind. So if you see on May 1st, there was nearly 3 gigawatts of wind, and then on May 3rd there was 0. And so, you know, if you're taking 3 gigawatts of coal off and you say, well, I'll just replace it with 3 gigawatts of wind. Well, you're going to find that, you know, on some days you're not going to have enough to run it. So that, you know, that we talk about solar a lot because it's got a very predictable 24-hour cycle. You know, wind also has a very predictable cycle. So in the Pacific Northwest, when does the wind blow? Blows in the spring and fall, right? And not so much in the winter and summer. When do we have our peak load?
Winter and summer.
In the winter and summer. Okay. And those are getting close to parity. You know, I think we used to be winter peaking forever, but I'd say now I would say we're winter and summer peaking. So that's the problem that Sweden saw with building out the renewables, is they kept building, and then they would have days when none of it worked and they didn't have anything to fall back on. Very similar to us. Next slide. So that's I told you what Energy Northwest is doing, who we are. Here's the problem we're facing. Here are the steps we're taking to try and help our members. So we are going to build a new solar facility. It's Ruby Flats. It's the north side of Richland, about 150 megawatts, expandable to 350. That project has been over 2 years in the making, and we're really at this point just waiting on the interconnection agreement with BPA, which just is taking longer than it should, but is what it is. There may still be room if you needed some solar. I think this at the solar bus bar is just under $30, and it would have to be firmed and transmitted, so it's probably 60 at the end of the day. Nine Canyon, which is our 100 megawatt wind farm. The first phase of that is coming up on the end of its license. We're working with the participants to extend that license, and in the process of doing that, because those turbines are 20 plus years old and not the most efficient, we're investigating with them whether they want to expand the capacity of the project. And then I'll say innovative storage. So we've dabbled in battery storage, and you know that's probably proven now. We're trying to do something different. We'll probably do it at our Nine Canyon property, but right now we're looking at a gravity storage system. So we think we can get a lot of federal and state aid for it. But essentially, it's an electric train, and when you have extra energy on the system, you run the train up the hill, and then when you need it, you roll the train down the hill, and it generates back.
Any passenger cars in that electric train?
But you know, I suppose there could be. Maybe we could
Sure, I'd
sell
pay for that.
tickets.
I'd pay a ticket for going up and down the battery.
But you'd only be able to go uphill when you had excess power.
And
Be unpredictable.
Well, if you ride to the top, then you have to ride to the bottom, because if you jump off, that's wasted energy pushing you uphill. We need coming down. Okay, on the nuclear side, we're looking at three things. The first is what we call extended power uprate. So Columbia's reactor is capable of generating a lot more energy than our steam plant uses. So the reactor essentially just boils water, then it goes to a turbine and spins the generator. We're limited by the size of our turbine and generator. And so we're working with Bonneville right now to do the necessary equipment changes that would allow us to expand. And you won't know until you actually start it up, but we'll get somewhere between 177 and 220 megawatts from that. And I'll show you some extra details on it. That study's in progress, and most of that equipment that we would replace, we have to replace anyway, because it's 40 years old. It's time for its life cycle management replacement. And so for a few extra dollars, you can make those things a little bit bigger and get the extra power. This second line, subsequent license renewal. So right now, Columbia's license expires in 3 months. But we have our first extension, 20 years, that takes us out to 2043. And we would look to extend that license an additional 20 years to 2063. We're a fairly new plant in the US fleet. So many of the older plants have already applied and been approved for a 80-year lifetime. So we don't see that as a significant lift to get there. And then the third is we're looking at a new nuclear project right now. I'll say project of record is a 320 megawatt small modular reactor that is expandable to 960 megawatts. And I'll show you that on another slide. Next. Okay, so the extended power uprate. So again, this is just increasing the size of our steam plant so we can get use more steam that the reactor is totally capable of providing. There are 32 boiling water reactors in the United States. 20 have already done this upgrade. 9 have partially done it, and that includes Columbia, and 3 have not done it and had not planned to do it. However, those 3, which I think are all with Duke, which is an East Coast utility, based on recent legislation, so the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure bill, which has a more formal name that I can't recall. There's enough tax credits in there that the Duke plants, those 3 are now looking to do it. And again, I can't speak for all 9 of the partials, but they'll probably look as well. It actually will lower our cost of power to do this work. Next slide. So the total cost of the project is probably on the order of $400 million, but it would all be financed through bonds. And if you look at the O&M costs, that blue line at the top is what we project our cost of power. So this is real dollars corrected for inflation to be over the current license. And if we were to essentially do this EPU, the cost goes down by at least $5 and maybe as much as $8 a megawatt hour. And the reason for that is our operating cost doesn't change. You know, everything just runs as it's currently running. There's a little bit of cost for extra fuel. So you essentially get 177 megawatts additional out without having to spend any extra money inside the rate case. No additional O&M dollars. Next slide. And this one is kind of blown up as well, but apologize for that. This is impact on the rate case. So Columbia's contribution to Bonneville's rates, we are around 30% of Bonneville's rates is attributable to Energy Northwest. And what this was meant to show is there's a peak in FY31 when these modifications are done. And then there's a slow declining impact, which is on the negative side. So we're actually lowering our contribution of the rates out through about 2045. And then it really drops off even more savings. That point on the graph is where we would pay the bonds off. So we'd use 10-year bonds to pay for it.
Do you have a formal position from Bonneville Power on this extended power upgrade?
Yeah, well, that started as no, and then working through PPC, we got Bonneville to fund the study, and they agreed that if the business case proves out, which we expect it will, because this business case didn't include any of the tax breaks in the Inflation Reduction Act. If you add those on top of it, the story only gets much better. So of course, it's playing off now against inflation on the costs of
Do you
the
have a
product.
hard yes, no? Or do you
Well,
have a?
so they funded $30 million to do the study. We're 1 year into a 2-year study, and we expect it will be approved at the end of this.
Okay.
But a good point, Atul, it's not yet approved.
Okay.
Next slide. Okay, next one, just talking about the subsequent license renewal. Again, this is 2 capacity factors for our plant. So Columbia operates on a 24-month cycle. Once every 2 years for about a month, we shut down to refuel the reactor. And that's those years where we're doing the refueling are on the left. And you can see we run capacities, not up near 100%. But in a non-refueling year, we are typically up at the 95, 96% capacity, compared with solar and wind, which are on the order of between 7 and 15% capacity in the region. So you get it 24/7. And we don't think the region would want to give that up in 2043, right as the 2045 goal hits us. So we would propose extending our license. The cost is actually very small to do that. Essentially, you have to do an analysis for the NRC showing that your equipment's going to last, your safety equipment's going to last another 20 years. That's on the order of $10 billion or so. That's the next slide. Okay, so the third option is about adding a new nuclear generation. So we are currently partnered with 2 companies, X Energy, which is based in Maryland, and they have a high temperature gas reactor design. And I'll talk more about that one specifically in a second. And then TerraPower has their reactor they call Natrium, which is a liquid salt reactor, 345 megawatts. For TerraPower, their off-taker, so TerraPower is owned by Bill Gates. Their off-taker is going to be PacifiCorp, which is owned by Warren Buffett. And so they have very deep pockets that will make this happen. PacifiCorp has decided they're going to build this in Kemmerer, Wyoming, on the site of a retiring coal plant. And we are providing licensing, operator training, and procedure support to TerraPower. For X Energy, the original off-taker was going to be Grant PUD. And Grant, I'll say, pulled out. They didn't really pull out. They slowed down at the last minute. And so X Energy, the terms of a grant they have from the federal government, actually both these companies, is they're supposed to have their unit online and connected to the grid by 2029. So when Grant County pulled out or slowed down their project actually to a 2035 deliverable, X Energy went to their backup plan, which was actually Dow Chemical, not an electricity producer in Texas. A unique attribute of the high temperature gas reactor is it will make superheated steam. And so Dow's going to use it more for the steam than the actual electricity. They'll probably do both.
Well, it'll be one of the most thermally efficient facilities in the world, I assume, right?
Yeah, well, it could be, not sure the superheated steam doesn't help too much on the electricity generating side. It helps some, but
Oh, so they don't, usually the cogeneration works well when the heat customer is taking the low grade heat.
yeah,
So it's okay. So because they're taking the high grade heat, maybe not so much.
right.
Okay, sorry.
Next slide. But Energy Northwest, while we're not going to be the first X Energy unit, right now we're working to be number 2. And so, a little more focus on the X Energy design. So one X Energy module or reactor is about 80 megawatts. So, that's compared to 1,200 for Columbia, so much smaller. The units are designed to last 60 years. They're all built in a factory and brought in on rail car and essentially buried in a hole in the ground. And then you just buy a palletized secondary plant from GE or Siemens, whoever, a couple of containers to bring in the generating side of it. It uses what's called a triso fuel. So at Columbia, we have 765 fuel assemblies, each of which has 10 by 10, 100 fuel rods in it. This design uses what looks like a cue ball size, and it's the uranium's inside that's coated in multiple layers of graphite and ceramic, such that it doesn't can't melt at the temperatures that uranium could reach. As a result, all the safety systems that we use in Columbia would not be required in this design. It's what they call walk-away safe. If something bad happened, the operators just turn off the lights in the control room and lock the door behind them, and it'll sit there safe forever. Another unique attribute of this is fuel as a variable cost. So Columbia, we load a bunch of fuel, and 2 years later we throw it away, even if it's not all used up. So I mentioned earlier, we set a generation record last year. It was 9.8 gigawatts and terawatts, and we could have generated 10, but Bonneville dispatched us. So the fuel that would have made up that difference just gets discharged from us. We throw it away, if you will. I'll show you later. We don't actually throw it away. And so in this case, the way it works is they drop these balls in the top. There's about 200,000 of them in the reactor. And over 6 weeks, the balls go to the bottom. They pull a ball out and they look at it and they say, still has fuel left in it. And then so they drop it in the top again. If it gets down and says not enough fuel left, they put it in a storage thing and load a fresh ball on the top. So the cool thing on this design is it is more responsive on the grid. So if you needed to ramp it, because you got a renewable coming up.
Like a pellet stove.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like a pellet stove. Again, so in our look at this, we would build 4 modules. So 4 times 80 is 320. The plant is expandable to up to 12 modules, which is just under 1,000 megawatts. And you can add those modules as you need them. Once the, common plant is installed, it's about 1 year to add an additional 80 megawatt module. So our plan would be to originally build it with 320. And then if there's future demand, we just add it as we need it.
Bob, is there any possibility of having us way down a mirror image plant of 12 more modules? I mean, could you do that at your site in theory?
We could, but we wouldn't. So Bonneville has indicated there are 6 sites in the Pacific Northwest that they would like to have an SMR, and their absolute preferred site is Centralia. Because once TransAlta shuts down, there's just a lot of transmission that comes to Centralia, plus all the loads on this side of the mountains. So that's their first choice. But then the other sites they're interested in is the SATSOP site in Grace Harbor, and then somewhere in Puget Sound area, probably like Naval Base Kitsap, because it's federal property and there's a bunch of transmission that comes in at the submarine base. And then they have 2 sites in Oregon that they would want. So we could build another 12 units at our site right now. Is actually designed for 3 separate stations. So we could put a second 12 module unit. But I think if we can get the first one built on cost and on schedule, and looks like a good investment, my guess is the next one would be in Centralia. If we could overcome just the NIMBY concern of building a nuclear plant somewhere on this side. Next slide. This is where we are in that project right now. We're in what's called phase 0. So this is a pre-project funding. We expect to spend about $5 million for it. We have actually got commitments I'll say firm commitments. Nobody signed a contract, but we have letters of interest for over 320 megawatts already. And I'll say less formal interest all the way up to the nearly 1,000 megawatts. So plenty of interest. Phase 0 is looking really to set up the funding, and we've gone quite a ways with that already. We think we have 80% of the project, which at the end of the day is going to be $2 billion, somewhere in that order. And in today dollars, cost of power around $65 and $31, you know, when it comes online, that probably inflates to 90. So it's hard to tell you how to compare. Today, it's fits right in the tier 2, Bonneville's tier 2 rate, and I expect still will when it's built, but it depends on your inflation assumptions. So right now we're looking to cover that 20% that we need to cover. We think we're going to get that by the end of the year, either from a collection of our members, private investors, or some of the local IOUs, investor-owned utilities, have expressed interest as well. As soon as we get about the $65 million, we'll move on to phase 1, which is really the site characterization. So even though the place we're going to put it, which is next to Columbia, even though there was a reactor built and almost finished on that site, we still have to go back and do the site characterization to get the license. We think that'll go pretty quick because it's been done before, and we may actually find we jump ahead of Dow Chemical at the end because we would be so far ahead in site characterization. And then after phase 1, which is about 2 years long, we would come up with the additional funding somewhere between $400 and $500 million to complete the project. So today, again, phase 0, we've had some of our members were able to contribute small dollars to large dollars. I think the biggest contribution was $200,000, and I think the smallest was $10,000. What you get for that is the results of the study at the end, and I'll say front of the line privileges for the capacity once the unit comes online. No commitments to purchase any power at phase 0. Next slide.
Can I ask a question for you?
Yeah.
So what are the percentages down below? So I'm assuming the 1 to 5 million and the 65 million are completely funded by members. And then when you get to the bigger numbers, there's federal funding kicks in.
Yeah, so the federal funding is that's the 80% of the $2 billion project, so $1.6 billion, and that actually doesn't kind of show up any here. If you look at phase 2, it says 20% or 500 million. That's how much that's I'd say the top end of what we have to come up with locally. And then phase 3, the rest is all federal, would all be federally financed. So I'll be honest, for the 65 million in phase 1 is included in the about 500 million in phase 2. Short of one of the IOUs stepping up, which is a real possibility, we are making the pitch for this to be funded out of the Clean Energy Fund. So that $1 billion that was raised in the auctions, we think we could use that. Certainly legislation allows us to use it. We just need to get the legislator to put us in. And we're actually pretty optimistic. We got Democratic and Republican support for it. We're just waiting for the session. So we think we'll be fully funded for sure for the next 2 years through phase 1, and that'll happen near the end of this year. And we intend to keep moving. So I'll be honest, Bonneville's, what would we do with this once it's built? Part of that depends on who funds it. Other funders are big companies that build data centers. So there's a bunch of data centers down in the Dalles and Matilda area, and they may be the ones who buy these first 4 modules. We're in negotiation with them as well. But assuming our preference is that we provide this or make the power available to our members first. Our members have expressed a desire for this much power. And so then how do we get it to them? Do we direct deal, or do we inject it into the BPA system? Again, the members who've contributed so far, I think are realistic in that there's very little chance Bonneville is going to add 320 megawatts to the tier 1 system. It's not going to happen. So it's probably tier 2. And we would like for Bonneville to fund this. That's yet another option. But Bonneville has been unwilling to do that until they actually get signed agreements for the provider of choice, because they think the Power Act requires them to have a clear signal for what the demand is. We disagree. The power plans are done by the Power and Conservation Council, gives them at least the opportunity to fund phase 0 and phase 1, because the power plant already calls out need for additional capacity, and we should look at new technologies, and specifically calls out new nuclear. So we're having a back and forth with BPA right now on whether or not they provide it. So a lot of moving parts. At the end of the day, I'm optimistic at least one of them will play out. We'll move ahead. Did that answer your question, Chris?
It did, thank you.
Next slide. So that's the end of where we're headed. This is just some other, I'll say, useful facts, hopefully useful facts. What could get in our way? Well, very sadly, but typically, if we have some of our members come out and look at Columbia, and we had a gal from one of our members come out for a tour, and she gets out of the car and she kind of waves her hands and says, "Oh, this is all very interesting, but until you deal with this nuclear waste issue, I can't possibly support it." And so, I think sometimes that because we sit on the Hanford Reservation, we are confused with Hanford. So on the left is, their problem, nearly 200 underground tanks of this massive chemical and radiological gunk that's leaking and has to be dealt with. And it really is a problem. But, DOE is moving ahead. And when you look at Columbia, first of all, we don't say waste, we say used fuel, because the fuel we take out of the reactor still has energy left in it, and we don't want to throw it away. Someday, we'll run out of uranium in the ground, but that's not today. Today, it's cheaper for us to dig uranium out of the ground and make new fuel than it is to reprocess our old fuel. But the technology for reprocessing exists, and other countries already do it. So someday we'll want that fuel. So ours is all solid material. It's, in those fuel assemblies, we put fuel assemblies in big casks, big concrete casks. They're stored above ground. There's no liquid in them to leak. And it's really not the same problem. Next slide. It's also not a lot of stuff. So we have 54 of those casks right now, and this is Scott O'Connor. He's standing in front of them. Those 54 casks hold 40 years of our used fuel. Okay, next slide. If you were to take all the used fuel from all of the reactors in the United States and stack it on a football field, it would cover one football field, 20 feet high. That's the total volume of used fuel in the United States. So, it's certainly not Hanford. It's not even coal. Look at if you got a coal plant, look at the size of the ash pound, right? And even solar. Well, there's no waste from solar. Well, yeah, there's all the mining and everything that went into it. And what do you do after 20 years when your solar panel doesn't work anymore, or your wind turbine is retired? There's a lot of garbage that comes out of those as well. So, just for, if you should ever get into a discussion with someone, they say we can't deal with it because of the waste. It's not waste, it's used fuel. It's an asset for future use, and the total volume is tiny. Next slide. Also energy use or land use. So, this shows about 1/2 of the Hanford Reservation where we sit. That's the Columbia River. The pink square is Columbia Generating Station's property boundary. And that's the whole property. The actual reactor is maybe on 1/10 of that square. So if you assumed we did our power up rate and had 1377 megawatts available, if you were going to replace that with solar capacity, you would get that yellow square that says 1377 megawatts. if you firmed it up to replace the energy, so, 1,200 megawatts times 24 hours a day, you got to go to that bigger gray square around it, which is humongous. It's like approaching 80 square miles of solar panels. So, if you cover the Hanford reservations, probably no big deal. The tribes would object to it strenuously, but look across the river, which is Franklin County, all that agriculture land. You cover up that agriculture land, you're giving up food for solar. So, Washington State, I'll say, in some ways we're blessed because we have barren land, but some of the places people want to build are not so barren. Next slide. So why nuclear? Today, 20% of our total electricity comes from nuclear, more than half of our carbon-free electricity, and it produces nearly 365 days a year of full power. Next slide. And in the Tri-Cities, lots of jobs. So Energy Northwest is just under 1,000 total people, about 700 of them directly support Columbia. And when we have our outage every other year, we bring in about 1,500 additional workers for the 30 days we're doing the refueling. So a lot of positive economic benefit. So if we do extend out to 2043, which is going to happen because that license is approved, generate about $9 billion in economic value. Next slide. Hey, just real quick, we have every year for decades been measuring public favorability to nuclear power in Washington State. And what I would tell you is historically, it's been about 48%, just under 50-50, 48% favorable, and very huge split. To the east side of the mountains, it's about 75% favorable, and to the west side, about 25% favorable. It was that way for 30 years, until 2 years ago, when now it has reached 75% acceptability in general. See, the numbers are actually higher here, but no real statistical difference between the east and west side of the state, which is just incredible. You do have to be particular about the actual question. So, the top one says, hey, in general, is nuclear energy important to meet our clean energy future? A lot of people say, yep, it is. The next question is it important to Washington State meeting their needs? Not quite so favorable, but still very high. Next slide. The top one here, essentially, would you want to build one in your backyard? And, people are less excited about that, but still pretty high favorability, certainly compared. And so why is there such a big change, and suddenly? And, actually, I was talking to Chris before the session, when I was graduating from school, probably before you were born, for sure. But
I'm in my 40s.
yeah, before you were born. In my generation, the Cold War was the big thing. That's what kind of rallied the community. Today, I think it is clean energy. When we hire a new employee, they, our next employee newsletter, they get a page where, talk about their wife and their dog and their kids and what they like to do. And we ask them all a couple of questions. And the first question we ask everyone is, why nuclear power, why the Tri-Cities? And almost universally, certainly for the professional workforce, they say, because, hey, we want to do something to address climate change, and we want to be part of that. And, we have 100% carbon-free portfolio. So it gets them very interested. And I think that's what we're seeing in these public sentiment surveys too, is, whether, I think whether you believe in climate science or not, whether you think it's human effect that is driving the climate change, I think at a more local level, you'd rather not stand there sucking in the fumes coming out of the diesel engine, right, or coal plant or whatever. So they're motivated. Today's kids, or recent college graduates, are motivated to have an impact on the climate. Next slide, which should be the end. Yeah, question. questions. So I apologize for running over my allotted time, but I do appreciate the, back and forth we've had. That's it, subject to your question.
Of course, I do,
Yeah, we're gonna have to keep it brief.
Yeah. but I want to hear from you guys.
Oh, just, I guess I don't really have questions. I do have some comments. It's back to the Denmark thing. Like,
Sweden.
Was it Sweden?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I could have swore it was. How did we get here with wind? Like, I feel like normal people know that the wind blows in fall and spring and that we need our energy in the summer and winter. I think, I worked in fishing and farming, so I know when the wind blows, right? And I run a household, so I know when I need my energy. So we've invested so much into wind. Like, how are we using that? How are we leveraging wind to serve our needs during the winter and the summer when we need it?
Yes, so certainly any energy is good to have,
Sure.
right? And to the extent that it's cost competitive, or even maybe a little more expensive, you could say, because it's not carbon emitting, it really does make sense. If you're in a region or a state where you have a lot of carbon producing electricity, so like Florida, think of it as the Sunshine State, but they're nearly 75% gas for their electricity. So for them, there's something to offset. When you run your wind turbine at 3 gigawatts, you can turn off 3 gigawatts of coal or oil or natural gas. Seems to be a reasonable investment. Okay. The problem is here in the Pacific Northwest, we don't have a lot of that. We've got a lot of hydro. And so the wind just plays off the hydro, which might be okay if we could store that water, but we can't. So as a general statement, it's carbon free, it's fairly low technology. We do have in some areas of the state, we do have some great wind and gorge. So why not? So it's hard to pick that apart.
Sure.
But when you do, you got to step back and look carefully at the electric grid, right? Because nothing will slow down the transition to a clean energy future, like rolling blackouts or price spikes in residential rates. Because the public's okay, yeah, build a wind turbine, yeah, build a solar. This doesn't affect them, right? They go home, they flip on the light switch, it gets bright, and their house is at comfortable temperature. As soon as that stops happening, it'll be, oh my God, what have we done? Chris mentioned California. They have actually so much solar built that they throw it away or give it away during the day. They sell power at a loss to Arizona Public Service because they're generating so much. And the power contracts they have, they've got to pay the solar producers whether they need the power or not. Okay, so yet they're still, how can it be that they're still having blackouts, right? Because their power peak is not when the sun is shining.
Right.
And so they're running their gas plants that are supposed to be shut down. They amended their legislation to keep them running. Diablo Canyon, almost 2,500 megawatts was going to shut down for political reasons. And in California, they turned it around and said, no, we're going to extend its operation now. So I think people are finally realizing they're stepping back to say, yeah, I understand this one solar farm's a pretty good idea, but how does that mix in with the rest of the grid to make sure everybody has power at the time of day, the year that they need it?
The other thing I would say is that these problems are a lot easier to fix when they're small. When they get big, like they are in California, they get really expensive to fix. And, a lot of things drive that. One is subsidies. And we heavily subsidized wind and solar. And if you were against the subsidies, by golly, you're a climate denier. And that the wind lobby was really effective at that. And sometimes it's the voice of reason. We can talk about net metering subsidies, and you and I have talked about that. And those subsidies are real; they exist. And if you want to undo that, so that you don't burden some poor family, so that some rich family can put solar panels on the roof, you're a climate denier. And it's just it's an amazing dynamic that we have going right now. But, you know, the earlier you can address these things, and here in Washington, I'd say it's still early days. And I think that's the graphs that Bob pointed out. If you just put those modular nukes in at a relatively early period, 2030s, you have an enormous leverage on the price curve. If you wait until the 2040s and 2050s to do that, you're gonna pay the price, you're gonna have rolling blackouts, and you're gonna build the nukes at the end.
Commissioner Grant?
Yeah, I just had my hand up for a little while and wanted to just tell Bob how impressed I've been with your staff and have learned a lot since joining the board at the beginning of the year. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you and kudos for all the work that you're doing. I think a lot of people don't know what Energy Northwest is and how important it is for our energy future in Washington. So yeah, just wanted to share that comment since I wasn't able to interact with you in person. I don't know. I'm traveling for my brother's wedding, so sorry to not be there with you in person, Bob, but it's been really good to connect with you all in the Tri-Cities over the last few months.
Thanks, Christine. And, you know, always family first, good choice. I will tell you, though, that earlier Chris signed you up for a 6-week reactor physics course in the Tri-City.
No. Well, I read a book about nuclear reactors a few weeks ago. So I'm learning, and Chris and I are also going to be doing a call with Ross Rebick in a few weeks to talk about geothermal. So also just, you know, I think that the nuclear work is clearly very important, but I do think that it's great that you all are focused on these other technologies as well. And clearly there's no technology that's perfect, but I do think that that's going to help on the policy side too, to continue making sure that that's known that this is not an organization that is only developing nuclear, because I think that is kind of the stereotype or the kind of first impression of Energy Northwest is that it's just the Columbia generating station. So you know, and I know your PR team is focused on that it's, you know, it's you're doing more than just nuclear, but yeah, I think that's really critical. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Grant, I was trying to pay attention to notice your hand. Is there something we should go back to, or a comment or question you wanted to raise?
I'm good. Yeah, I've seen some of these slides before, and so yeah, a lot of it. I have nothing else to add.
Okay, thank you. Well, I just we got to talk a lot, so very much enjoyed the presentation. I do have since the back end of your presentation was about public perception, I have a kind of a current events question.
Yeah.
Do you have an interest in, or do you, you know, the recent movie Oppenheimer? And I'm wondering, what that will do to public perception around nuclear. Have you have any ideas yet on that subject? And are you going to kind of try to read the tea leaves regarding what that's doing to public perception?
Yeah, so we'll do our annual survey again, it's typically at the end of the year. So I think, you know, Oppenheimer may play into it. You know, sadly, because I think all history is good. You know,
Sure.
People should understand.
Sure.
I think that knowing what the subject is, there'll be a large percentage of the population that just never sees it. They don't go watch it. And so, you know, the people who do go watch it, I'll say, tend to be nuclear friendly or technology friendly is probably a better way to say it.
Interesting point, yeah.
So I'm guessing not much of an impact.
Okay.
And fortunately for us, you know, while we were expecting to see large swaths of Hanford in the movie, they didn't show up. And I think they only said Hanford once, maybe twice. So maybe they don't associate us.
It's not as compelling as Barbie.
Yeah, it's an, I mean, obviously it's an unfortunate reality that the perception of a nuclear power is connected to the perception of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, that's understandable, but it's unfortunate because they're two totally separate subjects.
Well, just in general, technology can be beneficial and dangerous, and that's all technology. So all technology needs to be approached with some degree of caution.
Sure, yeah, it'd be like branding lasers, medical lasers based on laser weaponry, right? So yeah, laser weaponry is very dangerous, but medical lasers can be very helpful. So yeah. All right. So
Speaking of reactors and weapons, it doesn't it seem, so you were listing, so after Tri-Cities, there's Centralia, Grays Harbor, and then you said, well, you didn't say Bangor, but you called out basically the Bangor base. Doesn't that seem like like the natural second, but the reactors already exist there? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's a natural place to put it
And
if you're worried
SATSOP,
about
you know,
public
we're
perception.
unfinished reactors there.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, it'll really be, the decision will be driven by Bonneville and integrating it into the transmission system, and I didn't really talk about that here. We're not a transmission company, right? So I'm not the expert, but, the reality is the wires matter, and the wires are all full right now. If you were going to build, this week or next week, the Department of Energy is going to announce a plan where federal lands are now available for renewable energy development. And so the Hanford Reservation, 585 square miles, where the sun shines 400 days a year, is a great candidate for solar. And so there are going to be a lot of people who want to build it there. The problem is there's no load there, right? So all the loads over here. So now you build 1,000 megawatts of solar and there's no transmission to bring it across the mountains. And Bonneville will tell you, that it'll take us 10 years to just permit it, much less build it. So, just as we look to the future, where we have existing infrastructure is where we need to locate it. Now you wouldn't want to build solar in Centralia, right? And, so that's the dynamic, and yeah, solar's great, but it's not great everywhere. Well, let's build it somewhere it's great. Well, the people who are in the great place don't want it there, right? They're trying to build the Seven Hills wind project, 3,000 megawatts of wind, and nobody in the Tri-Cities wants it because they don't want all those wind turbines. So, it's a very complicated problem.
thank you for your presentation. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
And I'm going to sneak out and let you finish it.
Great.
That's
Yes.
great.
Good idea.
It's gonna make that offer.
Sneak out.
Okay, so that concludes the Energy Northwest presentation. Let's move on to new business. We have 2 items here, the call for a special meeting and a quick update from the general manager.
So I've offered to put together a rates workshop, which is going to have 2 parts. One is kind of a rates 101. The other is our actual cost of service analysis, or COSA. And that's where rates get real for us. So and that's going to be talking about the COSA, which we think will be done about then. If not, we'll have it in a place where we can talk about it and what the finished product will look like. And I'm just asking for your approval to set this meeting and get it on the calendars.
I think we've all reviewed it on our calendars, so it works for all of us. Any further discussion? I guess I should ask for a motion to call for a special meeting for September 11th at 3 p.m.
Sure. I move we have a special meeting for rates presentation workshop on September 11th at 3 p.m.
And I'll
Great.
second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so let's move on to item 6B, essentially, your
Yeah.
quick update.
So if you'll remember in our strategic plan, one of the things is that we would continue to work with all the small water districts so that we would be, both a provider of last resort and also a friend, someone that they could turn to. This summer, 4 water districts around here have actually run dry. And one of them is now sucking air out of their wells, and they've requested an emergency intertie. And that's really a testament to what the great work the staff has done here for years and years. We are not now seen as any kind of a threat, but as the possibility to help. So what I wanted to do was let you know that next meeting, which I think is the 12th of September, we're going to be bringing to you a proposal to do an engineering study and then an emergency intertie with the Alderwood Water District, and we'll be able to help them out. Now they've asked for a couple of different options. One is a industrial water supply to their high side. The other is an industrial water supply and a package plant giving potable water. So, you know, both of those things are going to require some engineering, and we're communicating with them right now. They made the request a week ago Friday or a week ago Thursday, and we're trying to figure out what their sense of urgency is. Do they need it like next week, or is this a January where they want it? And my sense is that it's a problem for them, but not a crisis. And so they want an answer fairly soon. So I'll be bringing that back to you, but it's, in my opinion, really good news. Not good for the Alderwood folks, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
But
no, it's a
they
good news
view
for
us
the
as
kind of
help.
relationships we built.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that update. Any further discussion on that? We'll talk more about it in our next meeting, obviously.
Yep.
I have a question since we're on water. A constituent had reached out to me about their well had run dry. And they were like, you know, they had wondered if the PUD could help. They actually called the PUD.
Private well
A
or?
private well, and the PUD couldn't help. There is, you know, in our strategic plan, we talk about water, we call out water associations, but then the next step was like that we would be able to help in cases of emergency, and it looked like to the public. So is that something that we're working on, being able to provide water to individuals at any point?
Industrial water, yes.
Industrial
That's the
water.
thing. First, it's non-potable. That's what we've got. I guess in theory, we could fill up some potable off the Grandview system, but we don't really have a mechanism for that. The non-potable water today, we can sell it to customers, you know, fill up a tanker truck off of one of our what do we call them, pipe stanchions.
Standby pipes.
Yeah. So we can do that. If you'd like, have them get a hold of me,
Okay.
and we'll see if we can arrange it. Usually that's a really expensive option. And when they think about, you know, getting a truck, getting it loaded, getting it over to their property, and then having it discharged into some kind of storage that they may not have, you know, they okay, no thanks, that's not helpful. What they really want is a pipeline, and
Yeah.
That's what we're not set up to do.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And maybe as you keep track of this particular community interest, I mean, we should explore, maybe there's something for us to do to. I mean, there may be some other step we can do. Maybe there is a potable fill station that we could set up, but there would need to be a case for that. And you need to evaluate that's actually beneficial to us. There's also liabilities of providers.
Liabilities, there's Department of Health requirements, there's some hurdles we'd have to get over, not insurmountable, but real.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might look at other municipal purveyors that provide potable water. Will Linden have an opportunity to fill? Would an existing water district, Birch Bay, for instance, give an opportunity to fill a tank to deliver potable water to inject into a well? Is there a water association that has that capacity to Custer, Large, or some other water
Right.
association have that capacity?
Yeah, and their need wasn't just for potable water. I think it was for, you know, out in the county, a lot of us grow our own food.
Mhm.
And, you know, so they and have animals and,
Mhm.
you know, so there was more of a need to cover their food production.
I mean, when my well ran dry, I put a tote in the back of my truck. And went to my neighbor and filled up the tote with potable. But I could now, not knock on wood, that doesn't, come to the PUD and fill up that tote with non-potable for irrigation purposes.
That's correct. You'd have to arrange that with us, and
Yeah.
we'd have to meter it and bill it.
Great.
Different
thanks.
tote than your potable.
Yes.
Right,
Please,
yes.
please, yeah. And we probably have a release for you to sign.
Right,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, if there's nothing else on the new business, let's move on to the commissioner reports. Uh, So of course, we've got WAPUDA meetings. I'll go ahead and talk first. I'll be attending WAPUDA meetings and the water workshop. Of course, tomorrow's Energy Northwest event. And the regular public power meetings, which will be early September before our regular meetings. So that's my report as far as meetings that I'm planning to attend.
Great. Yeah, I'll be attending the WAPUDA meetings also, but that'll be next month. I am attending the dinner for Energy Northwest tomorrow. Yesterday I attended a tour for the Whatcom Conservation District. We did it was their salmon recovery project, looking at riparian buffer zones and in the South Fork. So it was really informative and really neat to see the work that they're doing to recover salmon. I did want to bring up, just because, and I'll try to be fast because I wasn't here at the last meeting, I was sick. So at our WAPUDA, like the government relations meeting that we had last month, Commissioner of Public Lands Hillary Franz was there addressing the committee, and I thought it was interesting because she had said this year was a little bit different than most years, in that there were more fires on the west side of the state at that point than there were on the east side of the state, and which is troubling, and more troubling because just prior to that we had Chelan County talking about broadband, and it sounds like they deployed a lot of aerial fiber, and they were saying, oh, it's, good for 40 years unless the fires come through. And so, when Hillary Franz is saying this to me, I'm like, oh, I worry about deploying aerial fiber in Whatcom County for that same reason. Like if we're headed towards, climate change is coming at us, if we're building aerial fiber, are we going to lose it, especially up towards the mountains. So just an interesting thing.
And just a side, usually there's a FEMA declaration of emergency, and the public entities, not the IOUs, but the public entities can recover up to 87.5% of what they spent to replace that. So we do have some help in a big emergency from the federal government, which is great.
Okay.
So we've got a mechanism to recover that.
recover
So that
Okay.
that doesn't mitigate the risk itself, but it eliminates the consequence of the risk
Sure.
in terms of cost.
Okay, great.
Was yesterday's conservation event something that you would like the commission to approve as a per diem request? Or
It was just an FYI. I think I would probably, I was invited to attend, and I don't think it.
The policy is that if you bring it up after the fact, that if there's no action to question it, it's deemed accepted.
yeah, well, I think our policy is that we talk about it before it happens.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
before it happens, but
Right.
yeah, exactly, but what we've said is if something comes up after the fact, you raise it. If the commission doesn't
Yeah,
have
what do you,
objection.
Christine, are you okay with this? Approving Commissioner Arnett's per diem for yesterday?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Yes, it's
just
like-
wanted to get that
Yeah.
explicitly.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
and it was fine if you did it, because I didn't.
No,
have
I know, but
opportunity.
I
Yeah.
just thought I'd raise it, so.
Okay, thank you.
Appropriate.
Commissioner Grant?
Yeah, so I'll go quick. The ribbon cutting event for the port's first kind of segment of broadband was last week, and it felt really good after 2.5 years of working on broadband to actually celebrate the infrastructure going in, and heard from several members of the county council, Sat Paul and Michael Shepard and I all spoke, but I think the most important person that we heard from was a resident out there in Nooksack or out Everson that just was talking about how much it's changed her life that she now has fiber. And so it's slow work, but we are really helping people when we get this infrastructure in. So it was a positive event for me. And I look forward to doing a ribbon cutting like that out in Point Roberts in the near future. It was really more the port's event, not our event, but it was good to be there to support them. And kind of looking forward, I'd say in the near future, I'm hoping to join Chris on a few calls related to a potential geothermal project, including with Energy Northwest. But and haven't and we'll be trying to catch some of the WAPUDA meetings on Zoom, but I don't think we'll be traveling for them. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing about the ribbon cutting event. I hadn't heard about it. And is there any more information about that for those of us who are curious about what happened there?
Is going to be doing some sort of a press release. Their communications person was there, but like I said, it's really their event and their project, and we were there, to support. So yeah, maybe Andrew could follow up on. I don't know what Gina and Mike Hogan are planning to do from the port in terms of communication about the event.
Right, yeah, I've had intermittent check-ins with of course, Andrew and Gina, but yeah, maybe it's time to just get an update on that we can have in the next week or two. And other things, East County. So I'll plan that. Okay, so anything else from the commission? Okay, so we have another.
I'm crunched though. So are we gonna jump into executive session now?
Well, we have public comment and then executive session.
Okay.
So let's just check. Rick Miracle has raised his hand, and there's nobody in the room. So looks like that's our only public commenter. Can we promote Rick and let him speak?
Good.
You're muted. You're muted, Rick.
Okay, I thought you guys automatically unmuted me. Okay, anyway, one thing to point out relative to Bob's presentation, and that is the Hanford Reservation, where he showed where you could put large amounts of solar. Bear in mind, that's all habitat for the threatened sage grouse. The other thing, more importantly, is that I would like to wish Commissioner Grant safe travels and a great time with family.
Thank you, Rick. On behalf of Commissioner Grant and the sage grouse.
We
Okay,
have a Zoom for the executive session.
right, great. So
So.
Christine, did you want to say anything?
No, I'll see you all in executive session.
Okay, great.
See you on the other side.
Thank you.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Okay, great.
You good to
So,
go?
thank you. Just exited, the executive session. It's, a couple of minutes after 11. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll call this regular Whatcom County Public Utility District number 1 meeting to a close. Thank you all.